Okay, so we're going to start recording now, and thank you very, very much, Ellie, for coming to today's program. Really appreciate it, you being here and sharing your story and sharing the story of RogueShul with us, um, and your life story growing up in Terre Haute. So uh, it's an incredible story of creating digital Jewish communities with a lot of snark and parody. And we're very happy to have you here. So let's everyone give her a warm Hoosier welcome and her digital return to the state of Indiana.
Thank you very much. It really is a pleasure for me to be here. I consider myself truly from Indiana. My heart is definitely there. It's been a long time since I lived there physically, but my heart is in Indiana. A little bit about my history. I moved to Terre Haute, Indiana when I was 3. My dad became the rabbi there. We were in St. Louis before that. And I was in Terre Haute until I finished high school. At which point my parents then left also. So we all kind of moved at the same time. And my growing up, both in Terre Haute and at our congregation there, United Hebrew Congregation, really became the foundation for the work that I have come to do. I have a business partner who I'll talk about in a little bit, but she always says when I meet someone and they say, "Where are you from?" and I say, "I live in Framingham, Massachusetts, but I'm from Indiana." And whatever conversation I have initially with somebody, that is kind of where I start. And it really is because I was raised up by the community there, certainly both in Terre Haute, where my heart lives, but the congregation there, it was a unique and sort of life-changing experience for me. So having grown up in Terre Haute, I went to college to study political science and then psychology, and had no intention of working in congregational life, not at all. I graduated out of undergrad with a psychology degree and not a lot of ability to get a job. And I went to work for the youth movement. I went to work for the reform movement for Nifty, where I had been a participant in Nifty. And in that moment, realized actually I had a calling for creating Jewish community. And my career from that point, from being the director of Nifty Michigan, that's where I worked. I then went to graduate school at Hebrew Union College and did their program in what was then called Jewish Communal Service. It is now called Jewish Nonprofit Management, in Los Angeles, in conjunction with a social work degree. In those few years after graduating from college and working for Nifty and going to graduate school, by the time I was 26 or 27, it was very clear to me that I had a calling for Jewish communal life, and creating Jewish communities of meaning. And as my career has moved forward, there is absolutely no question that the fundamentals of what I believe to be important come from having been raised up by my congregation in Terre Haute. There is something really unique about communities, Jewish communities that are somewhat isolated. Here in Framingham, there's a congregation in Framingham that we don't even belong to. We belong to a town over. And that is a choice that we have that you don't have necessarily when you are living 75, 80 miles away from the next congregation. And what it means to show up, and to show up repeatedly and all the time without question in a smaller, more isolated community is just critical. There is no opportunity when you are a member of United Hebrew Congregation to have a squabble with somebody else on the board and then leave and go to another congregation. You have to stay and work it out. And even if you don't think there should be flowers on the bima, kol nidre, you have to work it out with the people who are making those decisions. That's not a reality in places that have congregational options. And it really formed for me an understanding that every person matters, every body matters, showing up matters. When I was a young person, if all the, at that time, women did not show up to make the congregational Seder. There was no congregational Seder. That was instilled in me, and I didn't even know that it was happening. And here I am, 35 years later, and my understanding of Jewish community is that you show up. So that's a kind of a little bit about where my roots come from, and you'll see it in the social media community that we created later on. But I I went to graduate school, and then most of my career was spent in youth work. And it's the same. Showing up for young people and encouraging them to show up for each other is a fundamental part of what it means to create Jewish community. The pizza and bowling is a means to an end, and I really firmly believe that. That certainly came from my roots. So after about 20 years in the youth movement, I became the executive director of a congregation outside of Boston in Newton, Massachusetts, about 650 families, and found that work was certainly more trying than working with teens. The job of an executive director of a congregation is unique, is putting it gently, but never boring for sure. I liked it. I really enjoyed being in the mix and helping our congregation grow and change, but I found it much more challenging and trying than the early part of my career. It wasn't as sweet as the congregational life that I had known growing up. There were a lot more demands, demands that didn't come as requests, kind of. And in that work, in the spring of 2019, I was talking to a colleague casually one day and said, boy, we really could create some comedy out of the inner workings of synagogue life. It is so peculiar. It is so unusual. I don't know that anybody else would find it funny, but I think it's funny. And she agreed. At the time I was the executive director, and she was our director of marketing and engagement. Engagement and membership. And so we created a Twitter account that presented itself as a congregation, sharing the inner workings of congregational life. It was parody. It was entirely fabricated. And it was in the vein of, certainly after the election of 2016, there were a number of Twitter accounts that came up: Rogue White House and Rogue FBI and Rogue CIA, all parodies of what supposedly was happening kind of in the underground of government organizations. And so we created this RogueShul account, and truly did it with the intention of entertaining ourselves, because we thought we were funny. And then what happened is it kind of caught on, and it found an audience that we didn't even know was out there. I will share some of the development of RogueShul and the tweets and the comedy that came out of it. But even more importantly, what came out of it was a partnership with her. And by about a year later, we realized that we had a very similar perspective on congregational life, and that we valued the craft of the work, even though the logistics of the work were so exhausting. That the beauty of being in community with one another, the beauty of accepting people's challenges unconditionally because they were part of the community, and moving through them, what was really beautiful. And we were interested in bringing that perspective of congregational life to a broader audience, really. I did not see it coming. I had my whole career, I was a youth director for medium-sized congregations, and I had my little world, and I really liked it. Even our congregation, I did not have larger aspirations at all. But once Caroline and I started working together, it became clear that we wanted to work with more communities. And so we created a consulting company that supports congregations. Right now, we don't have any in Canada, but it's all North America. We have congregations all over the country, and we work with them. What we say is all the things that congregations do, we can we support them, and it has been just fantastic. I knew that there was beautiful Jewish life all over the country, but now I have the data to say that it is there. We have big and small, coastal, certainly Midwestern. My heart is in the Midwest, and we have a number of congregations. In fact, really a lot in the central Midwest: Indiana, Michigan, Kansas City, Illinois, a couple in Tennessee, and it is heartwarming to me that those congregations are strong and thriving, even in moments of challenge. And every congregation is experiencing challenge for sure. It really has been wonderful to work with those congregations, especially in the Midwest. Um, it's hard for me to watch the chat. So those of you who work in or are part of Midwestern congregations, if you have questions that are coming up for you about what does it look like nationally, the congregational scope, or what are other congregations facing or dealing with, unmute and ask. As far as I'm concerned, I want this to be a conversation, and any wisdom I can share, I'm happy to.
Yeah.
It is, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I just have a question. How are Midwestern synagogues fundamentally different from Southern synagogues or
Mm-hmm.
Northeastern synagogues? Is there really a substantial difference, or is it really, one medium-sized synagogue in South Bend is the same as a medium-sized synagogue in New Jersey?
Um, there are regional, what we are seeing is that there are regional differences. It's not necessarily urban and Midwestern, urban and rural, for instance, but what we see is that in LA, for instance, the people who are drawn to Southern California, for the most part, are people who are involved in creative careers and who are looking for change and evolution, and who are really interested in trying new creative outlets in their own work. And so those congregations are more likely to welcome change and to try new things, even if it feels risky. In New England, um, most congregations have very, very deep roots, and many people have not, their grandparents or great grandparents were founders of those communities, and they perceive things not to have changed, and there is a real appreciation for consistency. And so congregations in New England are very, very, very hesitant to take risks or make change of every size. Those things we're seeing regionally. What we see in the Midwest, for the most part, is that there hasn't been. We're starting to see it now, but there hasn't been the influx of younger families that some of the coastal communities experience, and that is challenging. It is a reality that there aren't new people to replace leadership roles, to take up the mantle of supporting the community financially. And that is definitely a reality. There also, in my opinion, Midwestern synagogues are more likely to have a high population of non-Jewish spouses in their congregation, which is not good or bad. It is just a reality that those congregations need to deal with. When everybody in your community grew up in a congregation, things like dues make sense to everybody. But when you didn't grow up Jewish, dues sometimes are confusing, and it doesn't make sense. And so that's an element that Midwestern communities need to address.
And
Yeah.
which follows up two other questions that I have. One is, what can synagogues do, or Jewish organizations in general, because this is on everyone's mind, because you said, in the Midwest, there's a problem of people moving into leadership roles. What can they do to make their institutions more friendly to younger people in general? Because you get this question a lot, and
Yeah,
there's different ways of answering, but how would you say that a lot of synagogues have had success in the Midwest with that?
absolutely. Um, and this is everywhere. The congregations that are really willing to embrace the reality that a dues-based membership model is no longer appealing to young people are the most successful everywhere. The clients that we have that are really willing to say, we are no longer going to charge X dollars in order to be in order to be a member of our community. And instead, they have approached membership and supporting the congregation in a much more fluid way. That is the most successful. And many congregations are hesitant to do that.
Hmm.
Um, they're hesitant to do it because financially it feels risky and scary, and I get it entirely. But what we also see are boards that are made up of the same people that were on the board in the height of the richness of congregational life in the 80s, when kind of everyone was a little bit awash in money and Jews. Those people that were on the board then say, we paid our dues, we supported the congregation, and the people who are coming in should do the same. It's it's not a I don't have an opinion about that approach, except that it won't work. The understanding of my parents' generation when they were adults, and even me to some extent, I'm 48, that you are responsible to belong to your congregation because that is what you do as a Jew. That feeling of responsibility does not really exist anymore, most places. And so congregations need to address it.
Which raises the question, what alternative funding methods should a synagogue look for in order to raise the funds that you wouldn't receive through those memberships?
Right. Every place is different. In some communities, there literally are not enough Jews. But in places where there are flexible community commitment models, can work, where communities say, you are welcome here. We are happy to have you and need your presence in our congregation in order to be successful. And every year, make a pledge that is meaningful to you. The language we use is a stretch, but not a burden. And when congregations are able to be transparent and habitual about saying that, your contribution makes our community able to support the life cycle needs of the Jewish people here. Financially, those models have been successful, but it is a hard leap to take. Alternative revenue streams, there are a lot of different, people rent their building and sell their property and open preschools. That's probably another talk. But in terms of membership and in terms of welcoming congregants into your community, a more flexible, less stringent approach seems to be more successful.
And
Could I follow up on that a little bit? I'm Deborah Israel. I'm actually a board member of the Terre Haute congregation you grew up in.
Yes, how are you?
Congregation. I'm good, thank you. We're still here,
Yeah.
suffering all the problems you just said, but I'm super interested in what kind of experience you've had with congregations doing that transition, because in my opinion, we have people who are no longer active. They're not doing that showing up thing, partly because of guilt about not being able to pay the dues that they were expected to. And so how do you get, so from both sides of it, I get the people who, we certainly also have the people who, well, I paid this, I did this, everybody should have to.
Yeah.
Um, But we also have the other side, so kind of what experiences have you seen congregations that were making that transition from dues-based to a
To a
contribution?
flexible dues model? Absolutely. Yes. So the one element of a flexible dues model that makes that is sort of required is constant communication. You have to constantly re-educate your community about their engagement in supporting the congregation. With standard dues model, they get a bill, they pay it or they don't, and there's not a lot of thought that goes into it. But with a flexible dues model, a congregation does need to say throughout the year, this is what we're bringing in. This is what our expenses are, big picture. This is how your contribution enables our community to support programming, life cycle, and the needs of our members. And then at the time of renewal, to say, this is what you gave last year. Thank you very much. Are you able to increase your support by 3, 5, 10, 15%? What we are seeing is that conversation year over year yields an increase of 5+% in general. Now, somebody who's contributing a smaller amount, 5% is a smaller amount, but it also enables the folks who say, I can't or don't want to pay multiple thousands of dollars every year to the congregation, but I'm embarrassed to show up because I don't do it, and enables them to show up. And when the community truly says, we would like you to give a contribution that is meaningful, a stretch but not a burden, and really believes it, then the community does grow. And people say to their neighbor, actually, I've returned to the congregation. They have a new flexible dues model, and it turns out there is a program that I want to go to. Or I only go for the holidays, but I love it. I love going for the holidays. And that for me has meaning, and therefore it's worth it. Everybody just needs to come to the table and let go of the resentment. And it happens over time. Leadership of congregations who have toiled truly to enable their congregations to survive and have been very thoughtful about what do we need to bank and how do we need to spend cautiously. Those boards are legitimate in their frustration that there are Jews in their community who don't contribute financially. That is a very hard pill to swallow that I get. And members of the community who say, why should I have to pay to go to services? For me, that is a very hard sentence to hear, and I have to let it go sometimes because that's really how people feel. And we have to re-educate and say, you are not paying to go to services. We as Jews have a responsibility to support each other, and so everybody just needs to let go a little and come to the table with a desire for the community to be strong. Yeah. It is a hard leap. We work with congregations all the time, and the keys are transparent and consistent communication.
You mentioned that you went to the Hebrew Union College for your education. What do you think the effect of Hebrew Union College leaving Cincinnati will have on the Midwest?
I think the whole picture is really sad. My dad was ordained from the school in Cincinnati. As a young person in Terre Haute and going to camp at Gushi in Zionsville, I personally benefited from the influx of rabbis all the time that were my role models. I think it's really unfortunate. However, if the college had stayed open, it wouldn't have changed the fact that students don't want to study there. They don't. That is a much bigger problem for a whole different lunch, I think. But it is going to be a loss. But it's not the reason that Midwestern communities are suffering.
Would you say, though, that going even further, that if a rabbi doesn't want to study in Cincinnati, that a rabbi probably wouldn't want to have their pulpit in the Midwest, or is that just not a misunderstanding of the situation?
Yes, I think that that is an accurate statement. And part of that is just re-education. I mean, as prices continue to go up on the coast, my hope is that folks will come back to the Midwest. But it's not just rabbis. But yes, I think there is a real absence of talented clergy who desire to be in Midwestern communities.
So you're
Yeah.
saying that there's going to be a real, well, I mean, there's obviously alternative, like, I know this drives a lot of rabbis crazy, but there's alternative routes to rabbinate now today. However, do you see that there's going to be a shortage of rabbis in the Midwest, or how do you
I
think
mean,
this is
there's
going to play
already a
out?
shortage of rabbis everywhere. That's just fact. But I mean, I haven't done a rabbinic search in a Midwestern community in a couple of years, but like there are not enough rabbis being ordained for the communities who want to hire them. I think that is a reality we're already facing. Yeah. And alternatives to leaders, to para-rabbinic leadership is an excellent thing for the Jewish community. The Jews need someone to care for them. And we should make those things possible in any way that we can.
Why do you think then that the Havara model never really took off that well in the Midwest compared to the coast, do you think? Given those two.
It's a good question. I not being prepared for this, my first instinct would be that when you grow up in the Midwest, having the building, the synagogue, the clergy, the structure and the institution that is Jewish, where you can hang your Jewish hat, I think is really important. It is less important. I'm now raising children outside of Boston, and their Jewish universe is much bigger and broader than just our congregation. And so for folks where that's the case, a Havara movement that is much more organic and home-based and where people just want to connect with each other makes more sense, because institutionally they don't necessarily need it. But I think growing up in Terre Haute, we needed the temple, the building, the rabbi, the Sukkot experience as a congregation. That would be my guess.
Because it builds more of a sense of connectivity and a community, whereas a Havara is more of an alternative to the other bigger institutions, you would say, right?
Yeah, I think Havara is creating a family of choice where you and your immediate family can make connections and feel warmth and grow Jewishly and learn Jewishly. But a congregation, an institution, provides, for one thing, protection, but also just like a structural boundary that says this is who we are. And I think that matters when you are the rabbi's daughter in Terre Haute,
There are
or anybody else.
There are some consultants that say, I'm sorry, that buildings, they don't matter anymore. That the synagogue building is less crucial anymore, and simply downside. Would you say that there's a real importance to the buildings themselves, to Midwestern Jews, that connects them to their own Judaism, or would you say that's less of a factor?
I don't know. I mean, everything has changed since the pandemic and virtual connection. And the financial realities of maintaining a building are really hard for congregations. I would never say it's not important. I think it is really important for Jews to sit in a room together. I mean, what we're seeing with boards even is that synagogue boards are meeting by Zoom, and it's fine. It's very efficient, but they need a few times a year to be in the same space in order to remind each other that they're a community. They're not just, the fiscal responsibility of a congregation. So I don't think buildings are going away anytime soon, but downsizing is probably a reality.
Sure. Does anybody else have any other questions? Do you want to check out some of those the hilarious tweets now?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I will tell you all a little bit about about sort of the evolution of RogueShul. As I mentioned, Caroline and I started this to really to entertain ourselves. And I remember saying, if we can get 20 people to follow us, that will be all the Jews on Twitter. So this is a tweet from our very first day. We sent out 2 or 3 that first day, and this is one of them. And it came from an afternoon where our staff was literally cleaning out an old closet in the library of our congregation and finding progress notes from years and years and years ago. And so this was one of the early tweets, and you can see we had 4 likes, but those 4 did not come that day. They came many months later when some people were going back through the account after they had found it. But this was sort of the genesis of how it started. It was just us sending what we thought was funny things out into the world. So this is sort of over the course of the summer. This one up here in the corner, the congregant on the phone, I'd like to make a donation of 150 old prayer books. Receptionist, that's very kind, but we don't. Congregant, great, I'll be there in 20 minutes. So this trope of having prayer books dropped off at a synagogue is a universal. We didn't know it at the time, but it is. It is something that what we now call shul staffers deal with on the daily. Oh, I don't need any of these old Haggadah, so I'm just going to leave them outside your front door for you to deal with. So this tweet here on the bottom, this was a conversation I actually had with a neighbor. We moved into this home, and my neighbor said, "What do you do?" "I work at a synagogue." And they said, "Full time?" And I said, "Yes." And they said, "Is it paid?" I was executive director. "Yes, it is. This work is as actual career-based craft." And then this is the 10 commandments of shul life, but this got cut off in the image. But you can sort of see we were just sending nonsense out into the universe and picking up a follower here or there once at a time. And then right before Rosh Hashanah in 2019, we sent this. "Please buy your local shul staffer a drink this week. And for the love of Hashem, please hold your email about your April bat mitzvah ceremony." So this is the first time we used the term shul staffer, which has now become very universally used. And we got 50 likes on this tweet. It was about a week before Rosh Hashanah, and we were stunned. It was extraordinarily exciting. And it was definitely a bit of a turning point. And then this was that next step. This is about a week later. And the unsung heroes of Rosh Hashanah, the lay leader who graciously scrubbed spilled honey stick out of the carpet without being asked. So this tweet, you can see I didn't pull it off the internet. Caroline and I had books printed of our Twitter account, and I took this picture from the book because we deleted this later. RogueShul was anonymous, and as it got bigger and bigger, we were worried that someone from our community would recognize that it was us. And this actually did happen. We had a real lay leader who truly got down on his hands and knees and scrubbed honey stick on Rosh Hashanah day. And 127 people at the time found this to be heartwarming. So we're now about 4 or 5 months in, and Caroline and I were realizing that we loved the people, the characters that we were writing into this nonsense, into this parody, that they kind of had our hearts. This tweet was when the staffers found us. 214 likes. It was this day that everything kind of changed. We hit 200 people, Erev Rosh Hashanah, 200 followers, and thought that was it. We really had all the Jews now. And this was the one. The shul staffers saw themselves in us. The board member saying, "Enjoy your weekend," and the shul staffer being like, "Oh yeah, enjoy my weekend. These are all the things I have, but hey, thanks." So this is my very favorite tweet that I think I ever crafted. Thank you, Mrs. Jewinstein, for suggesting that the rabbi's wife organize some ladies to bake for the oneg. Seeing as she's the CEO of a Fortune 500, we're not sure she has the time, but we hear the rabbi makes a killer mandel bread. I just thought this was very funny. It sort of expresses the change of synagogue reality from what was true certainly when I was growing up, and is no longer true. And these two are my partner Caroline's very two favorite. I actually wrote the last one, and she wrote this: tried to set up a home visit for the rabbi with a 93-year-old congregant, but Frank says he prefers to meet the rabbi at the bar for a dirty martini. That also actually happened. And how come when we boo Haman during the Megillah reading, it's festive and fun, but when we boo the rabbi during his sermon slot, it's disrespectful? And the third time we've spoken about this, that I cut it off, but we had about 900 likes for this tweet, which at the time was a really big deal. And the comedy was kind of starting to take over. We were very conscientious that it be not mean-spirited, that we kind of create this parody world where we loved the people, God bless them, even the ones who like stole the herring from the Kiddush table on Shabbat to take it home. And then something kind of turned. We found a voice where we could start to offer praise and appreciation for people who worked in synagogues, and also for the leaders and the people who made up those communities. And this is the first two instances of that. So my background is in youth work, and I have just the teens of communities have my heart 100%. And so that's where this comes from. Sixth grader totally blew us away by shoveling out a parking lot so the custodian could get home to his family. So that did not happen. Our custodian at the temple where we worked lived in our building. He didn't have anywhere to go. But we wanted to start planting the seeds for people of really appreciating and loving each other. And that absolutely comes from my roots of everybody being in it together and appreciating that. And then this bottom tweet is the first of what we called became Shabbat shout outs. Shout out to the wedding couple who's walking on air blissfully, unaware that the 3 shul staffers and 2 HVAC technicians spent the day trying to fix the congregation. Eventually, every Shabbat, we would send a Shabbat shout out and recognizing different communities. And we would say, as Friday approached, who needs a little love this week? Is it preschool registration time? Is it the security VPs who are trying to make sure that the building and the people in it are safe? And we would craft language sharing with those folks that they were not alone. By the time RogueShul was 6 months old, it was biennial, and we hit 1,800 followers. And then were for sure we had all the Jews. And at that biennial, which was in Chicago, RogueShul there was a lot of buzz about it, and a lot of people wondering who it was and trying to figure out who it was. But also we were starting to see the seeds of the language and the conversation that we were creating, that shul staffers was a profession, that people who worked in synagogues cared about their community, even though their job was to write the yahrzeit letters and not necessarily to do the funerals, that work had value and that work had intention. And the people who were doing it were just as invested in their congregations. So this is just 6 of the many, many, many Shabbat shout outs that we sent, and also other tweets that were not Shabbat, recognizing the work of people. Shabbat shout out to the shul staffers who need Shabbat more than anyone. Also, first thing Monday, we've got a lot of questions. We did this tweet here at the bottom of this page. In October of 2019, RogueShul did a confirmation trip to New York. Now, we were not a real congregation, nor did we have confirmands, nor were we in New York, but we spent the whole weekend sort of bringing people on this Twitter journey of our teens traipsing through New York, and somebody got lost, and then there was this romance on the bus, and So that's what this is. But at the end of it, it was comedy and it was funny. At the end of it, we were able to kind of do a shout out to all the youth workers who give so much of themselves to create a space for our teens to be independent and to grow. Wrapping up our New York City trip, we want to give a giant RogueShul shout out to all of the incredible youth engagement professionals out there. Your job is hard, and we see you in everything you do. So it became a language and this really warm space. What I'm not able to show because it's hard on Twitter, but then we were having conversations anonymously with other people in the field who were expressing to us, I had this really hard day, or the program that I was running didn't go well, or the president of the congregation came down really hard on me. And the community was able to kind of hold itself up in a non-complaining but supportive space. It was amazing. So this is roughly the spring of 2020. By July 1st, 2020, our company had begun because we were so excited to kind of continue this conversation. Meanwhile, still anonymous. Nobody knew we were RogueShul, but we were planting the seeds of creating community. And then these are tweets that are not us, that are other folks in the Jewish Twitter space who started to express the same kinds of appreciation and love for their colleagues, for their lay people, for their board members, for their teens. And it was magnificent. I mean, it was really this woman, Rachel, at the time was a executive director in Washington, D.C. Shout out to the custodial staff who scrubbed, cleaned, and sanitized the hell out of everything that anyone touched. March 15th, 2020. I can promise you, I don't know specifically, but I can promise you that every executive director on March 15th of 2020 was drowning in stress. It was an incredibly scary situation, both in terms of health and in terms of budget. And she was not alone in expressing her appreciation for her custodial staff. So in November of 2020, we had started the consulting company. We had a number of clients, and it became increasingly challenging for us to continue creating comedy when we were also, I mean, none of the stuff we created was really about anybody specific, but we didn't want any of our clients to think that perhaps we were mocking them, which we never, ever, ever would. And we wanted to control the narrative of that coming out. And so in November of 2020, we published one tweet with a link to our website and a long letter to our people saying this has been unbelievable, and what the community that you all have created around RogueShul has been such an honor to be a part of. And thank you. And we're sort of closing up shop. And then we waited out of fear that people were going to be really mad, honestly, or that we were worried. And they were not. It turned out that people weren't mad at all. RogueShul did continue for some time, a little bit. It became much harder to tweet about things when we were not anonymous. And so the snark volume came down a lot, but it continued for a little bit. We don't do it so much anymore because Twitter is a very different space than it was when this started, much more fraught. And it didn't have the same fun or punch. And so instead, we created a Facebook community called RogueShul Staffers Confidential. Facebook doesn't allow anonymity, but once we were out, we could actually be ourselves. And we created a Facebook group just for shul staffers, anybody who works full-time at a congregation. It's about 1,700 people. And the conversations that happen there are so much more rich and so much more meaningful. And we actually, for the most part, kind of sit back and watch it happen. And what has developed is this incredible community among shul staffers. So there are members of the clergy, and executive directors, but there are also receptionists and people who are bookkeepers, all the voices of the congregation are there, I would say the loudest voices really are the kind of admin level folks who are on the front lines, who are seeing all the challenges that Sylvia's yahrzeit letters are never, ever correct. No matter what you do, they're always going to be wrong. And we just mailed them out and they're waiting for the phone call to come in. And then colleagues from all over the country respond to those posts and say, you got this, it's going to be okay. I'll send you a Starbucks gift card if there weren't any errors. And folks who a number of years ago thought they were the only ones dealing with the Sylvia and the yahrzeit letters are not. As it turns out, all the same things in every community, big or small, it's the same. And we have been witness to this connection of people as they have found each other and found, I think, appreciation for their love of the work. It's RogueShul staffers beyond the RogueShul, the Twitter account, hands down, just the best thing we ever did. It's fantastic. So any of you who work in synagogues, it's on Facebook, RogueShul Staffers Confidential. You are most welcome to be there. We would love to have you.
Wow, thank you so much, Ellie. Do we have any other questions here? Does anybody have any other questions for Ellie? Well, I think we only have 10 minutes left. Or perhaps we can do a quick follow-up question. Here, does anybody have
all the tweets are still on Twitter. If anybody wants to see them, they're all still there. So I spent some time yesterday going through and pulling some of our favorites.
And I think what's so funny is that Jewish historical societies always get that question. Will we take your prayer books? No, we also don't take your old prayer books either.
No, nobody wants them.
There's a Geniza for that as well. But other documents and photographs and old programs and things like that, we would love if you could send those our way. And if someone happens to say, what do we do with all this old stuff? Well, unless it's a really, really rare prayer book. I mean, we're talking in the 1840s, then let us know. But it's
PJ
so
library books. That was another one. We would get PJ library books by the bucketful. Yeah.
I do have a question, a sort of a follow-up on the question that had been asked before about the importance of buildings. So one of the things, my background is I'm an economist and environmental economist. And so one of the things we do is we think about, well, what are the reasons why people are willing to pay for different things, different amenities? And I do think there's a difference between the value of a historical building to the congregation and what the potential value might be to society at large. But what I'm curious about is from your perspective, because one of the, so I was super frustrated about the whole Cincinnati issue. And I feel like it's a broader problem with our divisions. I'm from New York originally, and I'm in Terre Haute now, right? So, but I think it's a broader problem of divisions with not just Jews between the coasts and the Midwest. And I'd love to see us being more of a bridge rather than just part of this whole problem. But what is the value? Is there any value to our historic buildings in the Midwest that maybe no longer can serve their function as the original intention, because we don't have the community, the size of the community anymore? But is there a value to the buildings? Or is there a reason why Jewish people care less about their buildings? Or what is going on with that? I'm really interested.
I think there is value to the building. Certainly, the synagogue in Terre Haute it's just gorgeous. I'm not one to speak about the value of architecture or land or buildings. I would have to say yes, and I don't know. My heart would be broken if that building was not the spiritual home of that community. And I don't live there anymore, and it's not up to me. So yes, I have to believe that's the case. But that building, it was built in 1911, and it is really magnificent in its design and beauty. Many synagogues built in the 50s that look like public libraries. I maybe I think there is a value for a place for Jews to gather. I think there needs to be a beautiful spiritual home, but Judaism never placed a value in the place. Right? When you build a sanctuary, it doesn't matter until there are people in it. It is not a house for God outside of the congregants. And I do think there is probably some very real value in congregations that maybe don't have an endowment, or where there is not certainty about the congregation financially being able to continue, to look at, well, what are the assets that we have, and to really think about it critically. It is sad. It is sad. People also, they want the memories of their childhood experiences to remain for them. And that is an okay feeling, but it doesn't change the fiscal realities of congregations. And that's big and small all over the country. When I was at Temple Shalom, we renovated our sanctuary, and congregant. This is a building built in 1955. It was perfectly fine, but it wasn't historic. And a congregant who had left and gone to New York heard that we were doing this and was very upset, because she had become bat mitzvah on that bima and it hadn't changed at all, and she wanted to be able to go back and look at that space. And she wrote letters to the editor of our local paper. She was not a member of the congregation. She was just very, very invested in things staying the same. And that feeling is legitimate, but not a reason for a community to not realize its assets, I mean, B'nai Abraham and Terre Haute, which is, at least when I left, it was like a senior center. That was the other congregation before the merger.
I think that's also interesting, that, to reflect that there were other synagogues that at least they found a use where the synagogue wasn't completely demolished or taken apart to the point where you wouldn't realize what it was. And if you could find a use, like for example, in South Bend, there's a synagogue from even earlier, from the early 1900s. It's now a baseball gift shop. So if you could find a great way that it could be historically preserved and you could still sell it, that would be the preferred way to preserve those wonderful stained glass windows that you have there. And like Ellie said, there's very few examples of um, mid-century synagogues left in Indiana. And so it would really be a shame if that was, at least the stained glass windows and some of the facades and the exterior were preserved, because it's really an absolute gem of history in Indiana. And I would say even one of the symbols of Jewish history that we have in Indiana. I would go that far to say that. And you feel a sense of I can see people like really feel like a sense of spirituality when you go there. The sounds in the building, you don't really have high ceilings in very many synagogues in Indiana left. So I mean,
there's also value for non-Jews to see that the Jewish community has not only a home and a building, but a building that is magnificent. And that, the Catholic confirmation class can come and visit that sanctuary, and Judaism and Jewish life, it can become very real. And I think in communities where Jews are the vast minority, there is value there too. And nothing matters as much as Jews being together. So the building is magnificent, but the people have to come first. The ability for the congregation to welcome newcomers and to care for its congregants has to be paramount.
Thank you so much, Ellie. We're almost at 1 o'clock now. I just want to thank you so much for coming here and sharing your story, sharing about RogueShul and about the future synagogues and a little bit about their past. So
it's my pleasure.
And what's your email address if people want to reach out?
Oh, absolutely. I'll put it in the chat also. So, this is the name of our company. It's Real-Time Strategy Group. And for those of you who are leaders in your community or shul staffers, we truly offer support in all the work that congregations do. We are experts in the software called Shul Cloud, which many communities use as their congregational database, and we know everything there is to know about Shul Cloud and support a lot of people in that way. And you can reach me at Ellie at rtstrategygroup.com.
Thank you so much, Ellie, and thank you for all that you do, and best of luck to you.
Thank you.
And your organization, and look forward to staying in touch in the future. And Hag Sameach and Happy Hanukkah to everyone.
Hag Sameach, everybody. Thank you so much for having me.
Be well. Bye-bye.
Yeah, take care.
Bye. Bye, everyone.